Welcome to Journey with a Destination. I'm Taylor. I'm a PhD chemist, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can use these 7 books to help your toddler understand biochemistry better than most college graduates. Now, to be fair, most college graduates don't actually study biochemistry, so maybe that's not saying a whole lot. But I still think you'll be amazed by just how much your child is capable of understanding about concepts that we would normally think are unapproachable to anyone other than a college-level specialist. Oftentimes, as a scientist, I think that we shy away from teaching younger children concepts that are associated with more advanced science, not so much because these concepts are intrinsically difficult to comprehend, but because we're not very good at explaining them. And I think if you take these 7 books and you walk your child through them in the way that I'm going to show you, I think you'll really be impressed by just how much your child is capable of understanding. And by the time we get to the end of this, you're probably going to understand biochemistry better than you did before, and you're going to be able to teach your child biochemistry better than you ever knew it before. So the first book here is Organic Chemistry for Babies. This is part of a series of books called Baby University. It's by a PhD chemist, and I really like this book because I think it provides a really great introduction to the concept of organic chemistry at a level that very young children can understand. And like all of the Baby University books, it begins very, very simply. It just shows you a circle here, and it tells you this is a ball. And then it starts introducing slightly more complex concepts on top of that. So it says this ball can stick to 2 other balls. Okay, simple enough. And then it shows us another differently colored ball, and it says this ball can stick to 3 others. And then here's another ball, and it tells us this one is able to stick to 4 other balls. And then it just reminds us each type of ball here can stick to a certain number of other balls. Imagine all the shapes we can make just by combining these balls. So all it's doing here is it's introducing children to the concept of what's basically a little building kit. This is just like a set of building blocks, except that it has its own particular set of rules where you've got little balls, and each different type of ball is able to stick to a certain number of other balls. And so the reason it introduces this is because this is really a lot like the way that organic chemistry works. With organic chemistry, you have atoms, and generally speaking, different types of atoms can stick to a certain number of other atoms, or to be a little more precise, different types of atoms tend to form a certain number of bonds. And so, for example, these particular balls here are a bit like hydrogen atoms, and hydrogen atoms form 1 bond. They can stick to 1 other atom. And then this green ball over here is a little bit like an oxygen atom. And oxygen atoms often form 2 bonds. They stick to 2 other atoms. And so if you look right here, well, that looks a little bit like a water molecule. You've probably seen pictures of water molecules. You've got an oxygen, and it's stuck to 2 hydrogen atoms. That's water. And then here, this little yellow ball is a bit like a nitrogen atom, and it likes to stick to 3 other balls. And carbon, well, that's this little ball that's represented in red, and the carbon atom is really central to all of organic chemistry. This is where the name organic chemistry comes from. An organic molecule is a molecule that contains carbon. And so carbon can stick to as many as 4 other atoms. And so all it's showing us is that with this simple little concept of atoms being like building blocks, then you can start making lots of molecules. You make molecules by sticking atoms together. And so it's just like the idea it showed with the little building block balls earlier. And then it shows you that organic chemists like to draw these little atoms a little bit differently. It's a little too much work for organic chemists to actually draw out a circle for each ball. So usually what organic chemists do is we make life easier on ourselves by representing each little hydrogen with an H, its oxygen with an O, and then carbon, because it's so important and it's all over the place. Sometimes organic chemists will represent that with a C, but other times they'll just represent it with a simple vertex here. You just leave off the C entirely, and so when you see that there's a bunch of hydrogen atoms and they're attached to something in the middle here, you just know that thing in the middle is carbon because they didn't bother to write what letter it is. And so this is just showing, well, that this is the same as this. It's just two different ways of drawing something. And so then it shows you, well, organic chemists like to study all sorts of different organic molecules. And it's the same thing here. You've got little hydrogen atoms here, and you can see that hydrogen atom is stuck to something that's a carbon atom. It doesn't show you the C, but it's a carbon atom. And so you've got 6 little hydrogen atoms and 6 little carbon atoms. And so you can see all sorts of different organic molecules, and it shows you some of them. It lets you know, by the way, the molecules you get at the pump in order to fuel your car, those are organic molecules. They show up in all sorts of places where you might not assume. Normally we think of organic molecules as, non-chemists probably think of organic molecules as being the things you find in plants and living things, and they are in those things. But they're also in all sorts of other places as well. And so this is just a lovely little introduction to a really simple concept, which is organic molecules are made out of sticking little atoms together that can stick to certain numbers of other atoms, and they can make bigger and more complex shapes, but at the end of the day, it's just like building something with blocks. So that's something that any 2-year-old can handle. And then the lovely thing is you can start to build off of that and introduce children then to how those organic molecules actually interact with the human body. So here I've got 2 books, Baby Loves Smell and Baby Loves Taste. This is part of a series of 5 books on the 5 senses. These 2 books in particular cover smell and taste, which are both very much associated with chemical detection. The way that these 2 systems work is when you smell things, when you taste things, what you're actually doing is you're detecting different types of organic molecules. And so, for example, in Baby Loves Smell, it's really just a lovely book here that shows baby's going to a market, baby smells something. Smell comes from groups of atoms called molecules. So it's exactly the same thing that they were introduced to in organic chemistry for babies. So it's great how you can build off of that one book, and then that allows children to better understand what's going on here with smell. And so the idea is, if you've got loaves of bread that are baking, they're going to be releasing lots of different types of organic molecules. And what happens then is some of those organic molecules are going to find their way into your nose, and inside of your nose there are special receptors there that detect different types of organic molecules. And so you're able to recognize when, say, you smell the types of molecules that would generally come from baking bread versus the types of organic molecules that would generally come from rotting trash. And so it's the same thing with taste. You've got chemical sensors within your mouth, on your tongue, that are able to detect different types of organic molecules. And so this is just a great way of building off of organic chemistry for babies and helping your child then understand these organic molecules. They're really important because they allow you to interact with the world and to understand things that are going on in the world. Whenever you go to the grocery store and you smell something, you're able to smell things because there are organic molecules in the air coming off of the produce, and your nose is able to detect them. Then after you've read those books, you can step things up to a slightly more sophisticated level by reading the Baby Biochemist series. These are really great books. They're by the same person who co-wrote the Organic Chemistry for Babies book, and these provide just a wonderfully rich understanding of the complexities of the chemical machinery that exists within your body at a level that 2- and 3-year-olds can handle. Now, these are a little bit more sophisticated than Organic Chemistry for Babies. There's a little bit more wordiness to them, and so you're probably going to want to wait until your child is kind of on the upper end of the age range that would be reading board books before introducing them to this. But it's just lovely because it introduces children to the idea of what a protein is. So proteins exist within your body. They're tiny little machines that do different things. So, some of them are like soldiers, some of them are like firefighters, some of them transport waste, some of them build things. And so it introduces you to this concept of all these tiny little things, and it then shows you these proteins. They're actually made out of little atoms that are stuck together. And these atoms include carbon and oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen. They're organic molecules. They're really, really big organic molecules that can actually work as machines that do stuff. And so it shows you how these proteins, what they are at the end of the day, is they're really, really big molecules. And so you can see how you graduate from understanding the basics of atoms stick together to form molecules to really big molecules can do really amazing things in your body. And then after you've read Baby Biochemist Proteins, I'd recommend Baby Biochemist Enzymes, which talks in more detail about one particular type of protein, which is enzymes. And enzymes introduce a whole new sort of chemistry. They introduce the concept of reactions and catalysis, how one molecule is changed into another. And so once again, this is introduced at a really simple level that, say, a 3-year-old can understand, but at the same time is introducing ideas that most children wouldn't learn until they're much older. And then I would follow that up with Baby Biochemist DNA. And this talks about how your DNA works, how information is stored in each of your cells, that explains how those different proteins are supposed to be made. And it shows you how DNA is made up of lots of little atoms that are stuck together, atoms like hydrogen and carbon and oxygen and nitrogen. And you stick lots of those atoms together in a particular complex way, and they can form this wonderful double helix called DNA. And so at the end of the day, DNA is made just like all the other organic molecules, which is to say, out of these little atoms that stick together. And then it talks about how that DNA then allows you to store the information for how to make proteins. And then finally, I'd recommend Baby Biochemist RNA. And this book then goes into a little bit more detail of how the information from DNA actually gets used in order to create those proteins and some of the steps in that process. And this book will reference concepts from some of these other ones that I've mentioned before, things like proteins, things like DNA. So if you were to just jump into this book without reading these other books that I've recommended to you, you'd probably end up being confused. You probably wouldn't get a ton out of it. But when you take all of these books together, they really add up to something that is much bigger than the sum of its parts. Because this right here is the equivalent of a toddler level course in biochemistry. If you just read through these books once or twice a week, your kid will start to pick up on these concepts, especially if you explain some of the things in the way that I just did. They'll start to understand how organic chemistry works and how biochemistry works in a way that most adults never will at any point during their lifetime. And I think it's really a shame that science education is where it is today, that kids can go through a K through 12 education and never actually learn much of the stuff that appears in these books. But you can teach a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old all of these things. And it's not unapproachable. It's not that the basic concepts here are extraordinarily difficult to grasp. Frankly, as a science educator, I would have to say, a big part of it is that scientists aren't necessarily good at explaining things. But these books can do a great job of that, and hopefully this video has helped you get some ideas for how you could use them to explain these concepts to your child. And if you do that, I think you will be absolutely astonished at just how much information your child can glean from this. Children are capable of amazing things if you give them the information they need to achieve that. I hope this helped you do that. If you enjoyed this video, I'd certainly appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. And in the future, we'll be making more videos that show you how you can use simple books like this in order to teach really extraordinary things to your child. Thanks again.